So it's really good to see everyone here on a Thursday morning. It's Thursday morning. I think everyone is always late. I mean, not you, but like people that we work with. So basically, what we would like to talk about today is we were thinking about like what's really common to all of us in like people that we work with, but also people that we don't work with, like our friends. And we can imagine that for most of you that you're here, you really care about what you do. And I assume that you also care about and are committed to growing your careers. And I assume that also you mostly live in London. So each of these things alone and all of that together can impose quite a lot of pressure. And perhaps that's pressure to know where you're going, to know what you're doing, and perhaps even the pressure to know what is your heroic mission. And whether you're a CEO or just an intern. Or perhaps if you don't have that mission, you might feel under pressure to adopt that vision, that purpose of your company. And I think it's a fact that no one can change the world alone, our environments can sometimes make us feel like we really need to operate as if we can. But we all know that that's not the truth, and we certainly can't do it alone, and we obviously can't do that overnight. And I think what's really interesting is that when we see that that is not happening, that the world is not changing by our actions, it can leave us all slightly daunted.
My name is Anna, and this is Sara. We both shaped our careers by trying to humanize technology for health and well-being. I realize humanizing technology is also Nomensa's mission, so great alignment here. We worked at startups, in the public sector, in agencies, and now we are at Google, where we are a UX design manager and UX research manager. When we met, we had quite opposing perspectives on how it is that we would like to make an impact in the world. But through collaborating together and facing challenges together, we learned that we can go farther together as effective work partners. So while we aren't aiming to change the world overnight, we found a way to see how our actions on a daily basis can have a positive impact on others, other people that work with us. So when we were invited to talk here, we were asked to talk about our work, but we didn't really feel like it. We didn't feel like talking about what we learned on our projects, or we didn't feel like thinking about lessons from the industry or design recommendations we may have at this moment. So during the next half an hour, we will reflect on how we are adhering, or we are trying to adhere, to our purpose through tiny little actions intertwined between professional and personal lives. And we will hopefully help you see how you too can try to make the world a bit better. So we'll do that through rephrasing 3 questions that we are frequently asked at work. The first one being, what is a great outcome? What's a great product? What's a great service? What's a great feature? We would like to change that into for whom those outcomes are supposed to exist.
Cool. So I would actually love to hear what that means for all of you and each one of you. Reflecting on my personal journey, so at the beginning of my career, my view on what a good outcome is was quite different, significantly different to what it is today. So from the early days, I knew that I kind of wanted to contribute to the world by improving healthcare, but I had no idea how. So at the very beginning, I was in the world of consultancies. And I loved the vibe. It was like, we picked big problems, we delved deep into thinking. It was really fun to co-create, and we created very ambitious ideas. We called it innovation, and it really felt like we were changing the world. But at the end of the day, I think it was all an illusion, because looking at outcomes, what was considered success for us was that effectively our client was impressed. But whether or not that client actually brought that idea to life was a different story, and that was a story that we weren't a part of. But I really wanted to be a part of that story. Apologies for the picture. So I wanted to see it happen, and I wanted to make it happen. So I left agencies and I joined startups. And as you may know, for startups, the launch is the ultimate success. So referring to the startups that I was a part of, regardless of whether we had 30 users or 3,000 users, all that mattered was that the investors found it worth their investment. So I couldn't really celebrate that, not really having the proof that the change, the outcome, created some change towards its intention. So anyway, fast forward, where I am today, we get to really launch things at scale, but launch still doesn't prove that change. So what is it then? I think we both had our long-term healthcare journeys, and we both learned that success can't happen overnight. And our perspective of a successful outcome changed really from launching it to landing it. And I see this primarily as changing the idea of success from short-term engagement to long-term change towards something better. So the key is not necessarily in long-term success metrics as such, but it is in recognizing the context over the situation. So in other words, it's about actually hearing your end users and not just listening to pinpoint at loopholes that could be fixed. So let's say, for example, we look at a diabetic patient. So someone whose lifestyle genetics can indicate that they might develop diabetes. So for them, we could say okay, we're gonna develop a certain drug, we're gonna then sell that drug, they're gonna be taking it over the course of years and their condition is going to be maintained. Or we can say, let's find a way to introduce exercise into their lives and with that help them avoid that condition entirely. Or the solution could be somewhere else completely.
Similarly to Sara, my professional journey was driven by thorough commitment and passion to doing research in the healthcare settings. Ever since I was a student at UCL, the only place I wanted to do my fieldwork were hospitals. And I've been asking myself a question for why that's been this way. And I realized that it's because I always found that hospitals are where people are at their most vulnerable. It's impossible not to see the patients for who they are and see the help that they actually need. But years of projects later, I see that vulnerability can be found anywhere. It just depends on how we listen to people and what we decide to hear. So to Sara's point, shifting a perspective towards having a long-term impact on someone's life is important. However, most recently, I've been finding thorough inspiration and contentment when trying to understand the realities of those who can't easily express to us what they need, or we simply may not be trained yet or enough in listening to them, the surrounding world around us. This may be plants, animals, or I'm not going to say this word, the artificial elements of the reality that we are currently defining. So, for example, when designing a building, how can we make sure that the surrounding trees have the space and the air that they need? Around the said building, how can we provide security at night so that people feel safe without allowing birds and bats not to be blinded by strong light? Existing toolkits and methodologies exist already, and everyone here, I'm sure, is pretty familiar with them. It's just a matter of who we choose to be our target audience and how we listen to them. So the next question is, what makes the outcome better? And we would like to change it into how we make it better.
Okay. So let's talk about excellence. I think you don't have to be a classical music enthusiast to appreciate the beauty of a powerful piece. But if you are, there's perhaps nothing worse than hearing one instrument going out of sync. So, I once joined an innovation department within a hospital, which was initially such an amazing and dream opportunity. It was really about, working on solutions at the heart of the problem. And there I met such remarkable people. One of them was this clinician who had an idea to solve a very complex healthcare issue with just an app. And I'm gonna leave the app default aside for a bit and focus on a more significant problem that was there. So that was that the clinician tackled it all alone. So the clinician took on multiple roles, worked tirelessly, drained all their energy, only to then pitch an idea months later that was instantly dismissed by someone with a completely opposing perspective. So I think there is nothing wrong with the idea of a one-man band, but it's just crucial to acknowledge that it is perhaps beyond their ability to perform a symphony. And it's very hard for me to say this, because in the past, when someone said to me, "You cannot," I was like, "Watch me do it," and I did it. But I'm only to realize that I was doing it for validation of someone or something that I didn't really care about. But I still cared about the outcome. And then I realized that even if in a role of a soloist, I would still need to attune to the symphony of whatever orchestra it is that was capable of performing that quote-unquote symphony. So as the saying goes, I think you really can go far alone, but you can only go much farther together. So concretely, looking at our LinkedIn profiles, everyone's LinkedIn profiles, your CV alone can prove that you are a rock star, but I think that just a week in a team can dispute that completely. So from that perspective, I think that your success is not measured by your capabilities alone, but by your ability to apply those capabilities to elevating others. And that means building on top of each other's ideas. It means recognizing that the goal is joint and that the responsibility is shared. So we actually see the same in the teams that we manage and collaborate with. And the key to success is really seeing yourself and others for what it is that each of you can give to another, and by that, make the team successful as a whole. So here, talking about success, it's really about the shift of perspective from making joint outcomes successful to getting there by making others successful.
Being emotional has historically been very problematic and perceived as a weakness, or even more than that, an inability. Centuries of psychiatrists wrote books and books how to tame uncontrollable emotions. Then decades of anthropologists did studies defining wild, hot, eruptive feminine cultures in direct opposition to civilized, cold, composed masculine ones. Emotions did not have a place in a workplace at all, full stop. I really like this quote from John Cacioppo, who was a professor in the studies of loneliness. We all depend on each other. And to me, that dependability in the work context means making room for others to depend on us, but also for us to depend on others, with the latter being what we frequently forget. So the journey from an independent selfhood to a dependent coworker, friend, partner has been long for us. And by growing in personal lives, we've been then applying same principles at work, perceiving things as ever-changing, learning tools for how to regain a sense of control of a situation, and growing to be healthily triggered by others are all lessons that apply across private and professional lives. Similarly, we've seen that by navigating those hot and eruptive emotional worlds of ours in a constructive way, and by making space for others to navigate theirs with us, we can stay true to ourselves while building strong bonds, professional bonds, and ensuring collaborations that will last way more than one project. And then last but not the least, the main question of today. It's not about what makes the world a tiny bit better, but it's about the intention behind it.
And I really love the point that Anna made about dependability, vulnerability, and I think that's also very evident in nature. And there is this one example that I really love. It was based in Yellowstone National Park, basically 100 years back, but it's the story that evolved throughout the decade, throughout the century. So in 1920s, the park officials decided to remove the wolves from the park. And the claim behind it was to save other species. However, that led to ecosystem collapse. So concretely, certain species, animal species such as beavers, started overpopulating. They started destroying trees. That pushed trees into extinction. That caused erosion and floods, etc., etc. And that was going on for nearly 70 years. So the park and the local government threw a lot of money at the problem, and they started introducing a ton of artificial interventions, but nothing really helped. And nothing really helped for 70 years. And then one day, which was about 20 years back, the wolves decided to return, and no one stopped them. So they started to prey on other species, and with that, slowly restored the balance. So out of a sudden, it took about 5 years. The ecosystem was basically reborn, restored. The balance was back, and no artificial intervention was required. And I love this example because it's a great comparison to how artificial systems work or should work. And talking about systems, healthcare is one example, and to what is known to all of you guys, the NHS. So for the NHS, National Healthcare System, orchestration is really vital. So that is not orchestration just between clinicians and hospitals, but it's also between information systems and protocols that those clinicians leverage and depend on while providing effective care. So in my hospital experience, we learned that solving systemic issues required more than just an app. Basically, we had to improve how the teams, the clinicians, worked together, depend on one another, but we also had to reach out to various bodies that were providing information and other tooling to those clinicians. And we had to basically make them adopt that to a higher standard. We had to connect the bits, connect the dead ends, and with that enable interoperability, or in other words, codependency. So not just between the outcomes, but also between those stakeholders that were providing all those things. So that means there were a lot of behind the scenes changes, and although these were invisible, all together made a big difference. And the difference was seen not just in better outcomes in how the care was provided to patients, but also the care was but also we saw massive improvements between how those stakeholders well, my God, I can't. So anyway, everyone benefited at the end of the day. So why I like this scenario is because it highlights how isolated solutions, such as apps, can be very short-sighted in the environments that we all live in. So it's not just about the systems that we depend on. And it's very essential that we not only address the right problem that needs solving, but that we try to see how we can trigger a chain reaction of things to better. And with that, adopt altruistic approach or egoistic approach. So if we take the clinician example the clinician example that I mentioned previously, so the initial plan, creating an app, that could have resulted in quick profit app. And that could have attracted investments, even if the thing only saved 10 lives on paper. But opting for systemic approach really benefited not just the system, but actually everyone, numerous stakeholders involved. And so with that, I really want to flag that sometimes the solution lives outside the problem itself. So if you remember the example of a pre-diabetic patient, maybe that patient doesn't need a drug. Maybe they don't even need a fitness app to get moving. Maybe all they need to actually get moving is to feel safe on the roads. And with that, a solution could just be to convince a local council to build safer cycling lanes, or whoever is capable of doing that. And just this cycling lanes example, I think it goes without saying how such a solution could trigger a chain reaction of changes to better.
We tend to demand a lot from our workplace. A lot of us are trying for our employer to give us money, satisfaction, commitment, inspiration, fun, and most importantly, personal growth, obviously. And I'm not saying that a place like that doesn't exist. If it does, great, let me know who they are. But overall, that's a lot to ask from one employer. On top of that, our industry is heavily saturated with talent, incredible people that have very specialized sounding titles, fancy levels, and positions that don't really mean that much from people outside of our industry. I mean, my parents definitely don't know what I do for a living.
Same.
And yet there is a whole world out there full of various environments and other industries that are not as privileged as us in terms of resources that we have access to, and ones that would largely benefit from the creative skill sets that we as designers and researchers can bring. A few months ago, I reached out to the LinkedIn community about needing to find researchers to help with a voluntary project that I'm involved in. And the scope of engagement, responses, resharing that we received completely surpassed our expectations. The notion of giving back really resonated with friends, but also complete strangers. And I think, obviously, the last few years have been exponentially hard on global industry and personal levels, and we are definitely very thirsty for real connection. And what helped me in expressing this stuck, blocked energy was going outside of my immediate work, having a literal look around me. My preference is to focus on my neighborhood, but you can interpret it as you would like, and getting engaged with what I found. And it turned out through that sometimes this inspiration is not hidden in between the calendar invites at work, never-ending calendar invites, nor in the belief that I need to create a new product or I need to launch a new business, a new side business. But it's waiting somewhere else on projects that may already exist, and focus on helping others instead of indulging on our own hustling.
So with that,
Yeah.
let's talk about takeaways. First, we would really like to invite you to stop focusing on the what, and rather, so when you think about what is it that you need to do,
Think about for whom.
and when you think about who you need to work with,
Think about how.
and finally, when you think what's the point of it all,
Think about why.
yeah, so let's talk. We would love to hear from you, but let's absolutely not talk about the what.
Cool, thank you. That was a brilliant talk.
So how did you kind of come to kind of adopt this thinking? Where kind of did this originate?
I thought we explained.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think what kind of situation were you in order to kind of?
Yeah, I think it's the transition to managing and to leading projects was really key in understanding what is the value that we can bring to our teams and what actually matters to us. I think the moment we stopped doing the actual work and started figuring out how to help others do that work, that's when we really started focusing on it deeply.
Yeah,
So.
because it really means you see your team and there are questions in but what's the point of it all? What should I do? How do you motivate people when they see that what they have worked on for a year is not actually getting launched, or is launched in a different way, or maybe it doesn't have that impact that you initially sold as like, hey, here's why you should join my team.
Yeah.
I think it has, but it's a compound effect, and you really need to see it from a different perspective. So it was about like not just how we care about the work that we do, but how do we care about our teams, and how we can help them care about each other, to then together come to things that matter, not just to the company, but to every single one of them.
Brilliant, thank you. Has anyone got any questions now? No. Yes, please at the front. Oh wait, we have a mic just because I think people at the back won't be able to hear you.
I thought everyone was hearing me. Well, I just wanted to say that I'm pleasantly surprised by the content of this presentation. It feels like a kind of very innovative way of, presenting something that is obvious in a way, or, sorry, I don't want to say that it's obvious, but I just wonder if that comes from, for you, it's like a change in the way you do things. It may be, I'm thinking about references that you had previously as, in other experiences working in other companies. I kind of feel very inspired by all of it. Not sure if it's a question, but.
I mean, I think that, again, it's, I'm not sure it's a shift, but it's just a growth. I mean, I'm not talking for you, but I definitely feel like that side of my work interests me way more these days than the other, which is why.
And I think to build on top of your point, it's not necessarily, you don't mean that like, oh, you don't care about the outcomes. It's just you realize where you can have bigger impact. And basically it's about almost like creating that impact through either other people or other things, as long as you all care about the same thing. But to your question, thank you for observation, and I think it's not just about previous experience, but just being observing things around you, both whether that is in friendships, family, relationships, just in the world itself and how it works and how it doesn't work, and trying to see how you can then adapt these learnings and translate them to the actual work.
Awesome, thank you. Sara and Anna, everyone.
Thank you.